Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey into the frozen heart of British Columbia. Through its forgotten corners and isolated small towns buried between endless forests, coastal fog, and mountain roads, places where help does not reach. Here, 7 of the most disturbing, real, and terrifying true horror stories have emerged. Accounts that will make you question what truly survives beyond the last streetlight. These are not legends or campfire tales. These are real, documented encounters from ordinary people. From abandoned logging towns to basements hiding secrets. From creatures that should not exist to disappearances that defy explanation. Tonight, you will hear horrors that refuse to stay buried. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of British Columbia, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Rowe, and this happened when I was 29, living in a place most maps barely bother to name. Pine Creek, British Columbia. I moved there for one reason: escape. After my divorce, I wanted silence, work, and distance from people who knew my past too well. Pine Creek offered all of that. A single gas station, a diner that closed before sunset, and a logging road that cut straight through the forest like a scar. Locals warned me about that road on my first night. Not directly, no dramatic stories, just pauses in conversation. Tight jaws. One old man said, "Don't stop if you hear it." I laughed, assuming he meant wolves or wind. But the road had a sound at night. Not animals, not wind. A slow, deliberate whistling, always just far enough away that you couldn't tell where it came from. The first time I heard it, I convinced myself it was nothing. That lie lasted exactly 3 nights. I worked nights at the Pine Creek sawmill, which meant driving that road alone at 2:30 a.m. every shift. The whistling always started near mile marker 7. Never before, never after. 3 soft notes, repeated slowly, like someone practicing but never finishing a tune. The first week, I kept driving. The second week, curiosity crept in. I slowed down once, just once, and the whistling stopped immediately. The silence that followed felt heavier than sound, like the forest itself was holding its breath. My chest tightened and I sped off, heart hammering. The next morning, I asked my coworker Liam about it. He went pale, told me his cousin disappeared on that road 10 years earlier after pulling over to investigate, someone whistling for help. No body, no car, just tire tracks leading into the trees. That night, the whistling changed. It sounded closer. And this time, it sounded like it knew my name. By the 3rd week, sleep became impossible. Even inside my cabin, miles from mile marker 7, I would wake up convinced I could still hear that whistling drifting through the walls. It wasn't loud. That was the worst part. It sounded patient, like it knew I had nowhere else to go. I started drinking more coffee, more alcohol, anything to dull the edges of my nerves. One night, Liam didn't show up for work. His phone went straight to voicemail. The foreman said maybe he quit without notice, but no one really believed that. Liam needed the job. He had a kid on the way. When his truck was found 2 days later, parked neatly on the shoulder near mile marker 7, my stomach dropped. There were no skid marks, no sign of struggle. Just the driver's door open and muddy footprints leading into the trees. Small footprints, barefoot, too narrow to be Liam's. That night, the whistling added a 4th note. I told myself I wouldn't drive that road anymore. I even packed my things, planning to leave Pine Creek for good. But on my final night shift, The mill called short-staffed, begging me to come in. I needed the money. I hated myself for saying yes. As I approached mile marker 7, the whistling began immediately. Louder than ever, closer, layered, like multiple mouths trying to sound human. My hands shook on the steering wheel. Then I saw it. A figure stood on the road ahead, illuminated by my headlights. Bare feet, mud-smeared legs. Its back was turned to me, shoulders jerking unnaturally as it whistled. I slowed despite every instinct screaming not to. That's when it stopped whistling and spoke. "Ethan," it said in Liam's voice, wrong somehow, stretched thin. "You stopped last time." I slammed the gas. In my side mirror, I saw it bend backward, far too far, and sprint after my truck on all fours, smiling wider than a human mouth should allow. I don't remember how I made it back to my cabin. I only remember locking the door, pushing a chair against it, and sitting on the floor until sunrise with a kitchen knife in my shaking hand. My truck was parked outside, streaked with mud along the sides, handprints smeared across the tailgate as if something had clung to it while I drove. I told myself it was an animal. I had to believe that. By morning, Pine Creek felt wrong. Too quiet. The diner was closed. The gas station lights were off. Even the mill siren didn't sound. I drove into town and found police cars parked outside Liam's house. His wife was screaming in the yard, holding something wrapped in a blanket. It was his boots, just the boots, cleaned, placed neatly on their porch overnight. The officers asked where I'd been the night before. When I mentioned mile marker 7, they exchanged looks that told me I had said too much. One of them quietly asked if I had heard whistling. I nodded. He told me to leave Pine Creek immediately. I packed my truck in under an hour. As I pulled away, I noticed strange carvings on the trees near my cabin. Spirals and long slashes, fresh, cut deep into the bark. I was sure they hadn't been there before. It felt like a warning, or a map. The only road out of Pine Creek was the same logging road that led past mile marker 7. I tried not to look as I passed it in daylight, but something was different. The trees leaned inward now, closer than before, their shadows overlapping across the asphalt. Halfway past the marker, my engine stalled. The sudden silence was absolute. Then I heard it again. The whistling. Soft, close, right behind my truck. I didn't turn around. I didn't breathe. A hand tapped lightly on my driver's side window. Slow, polite, patient. In Liam's voice, it whispered, "You still owe me a stop." The engine roared back to life on its own. I drove without stopping until Pine Creek was miles behind me. I never went back. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that whistling, right outside my window. I thought distance would end it. Vancouver was loud, crowded, alive. Everything Pine Creek wasn't. For a while it worked. Weeks passed without nightmares. I started sleeping again. I even laughed a few times, something I hadn't done in months. I told myself the forest had lost my trail. Then the packages started arriving. No return address, just my name, written carefully in block letters. Inside the first box was a pine branch, still wet with sap. The second contained a smooth river stone, carved with the same spiral marks I'd seen on the trees near my cabin. The third box arrived at 2:17 a.m. I know because I was awake when the whistling drifted through my apartment window 12 floors up. 3 notes, 4 notes. I pressed my ear to the glass, heart racing, and heard footsteps echoing from the alley below. Bare feet slapping concrete. Someone was standing directly beneath my window, looking up. In Liam's voice, soft and disappointed, it said, "Cities don't count. Roads still laid back." I moved again. And again, different cities, different provinces. It didn't matter. Every place has roads. Every place has trees somewhere nearby. The whistling always finds me eventually. Sometimes it comes from storm drains, sometimes from wooded parks, once from a subway tunnel after midnight. I finally spoke to an elder from a nearby First Nations community, someone who agreed to listen without interrupting. When I finished, he didn't look surprised. He said some places learn hunger. When people vanish unnoticed, when forests are cut and towns dry up, something stays behind to collect what it's owed. I asked him how to make it stop. He shook his head. It doesn't want everyone, he said. Just the ones who hear it and don't keep moving. I haven't unpacked a box in 3 years. I never drive the same road twice if I can help it. And if you ever find yourself in British Columbia on a quiet logging road where the forest leans too close and you hear someone whistling behind you, don't slow down. It already knows your name. Last winter, I made a mistake. I stopped. Not on a forest road, not near Pine Creek, just a harmless stop on a snow-covered highway outside a town I don't even remember the name of. My tire pressure light came on, and exhaustion overruled fear. I pulled onto the shoulder, engine running, lights on. The night was silent. Too silent. Then, faintly, from somewhere beyond the tree line, I heard it. 3 notes, then 4, perfectly spaced, calm, confident. I stayed in the truck, staring straight ahead, whispering to myself that it wasn't real, that it couldn't be. The whistling circled slowly, moving from the forest to the road, to right beside my door. Something leaned down, blocking my side mirror. I could smell damp earth and sap, sharp and fresh, like a newly cut tree. In a voice that wasn't Liam's anymore, older, layered, hungry, it whispered, "You almost kept moving forever." My tire pressure light turned off on its own. I drove until sunrise, hands numb, knowing that stopping hadn't gone unnoticed. I'm telling this now because Pine Creek no longer exists. The mill shut down. The town emptied. Satellite images show nothing but overgrown roads and collapsing roofs. Mile marker 7 is gone, pulled out and discarded like it never mattered. But the road is still there. Roads always are. I don't believe the thing followed me. I believe it was always everywhere it needed to be, waiting for roads to be quiet enough, for people lonely enough to listen. Sometimes, late at night, I practice driving routes in my head, never stopping, never slowing, always moving forward. I don't own a home. I don't put down roots. I don't whistle. Because I know now what that sound really is. It isn't calling for help. It isn't luring you closer. It's counting. Counting how many people hear it. Counting how many slow down. Counting how many roads are left. And one day, when there are no quiet places left to hide it, I'm afraid it won't need to whistle anymore. My name is Caleb Morrison, and this happened when I was 34, after I moved to a coastal town called Blackwater Bay, tucked along the ragged shoreline of British Columbia. I came for work, marine electrical repairs on fishing boats, but I stayed because the place felt forgotten in a way I understood. The town clung to the edge of the water, half its buildings permanently damp, paint peeling from years of fog and salt. The locals were polite but distant. Conversations ended quickly once the sun went down. Everyone locked their doors early. And every night, without fail, the bay went completely dark. No boats, no navigation lights, nothing. On my first evening, I asked the harbor master why no one fished at night. He stared out at the water for a long moment before answering. "Because the lights come up," he said. I laughed, expecting a joke. He didn't smile. That night, Standing on the dock outside my rented room, I saw it for myself. Deep beneath the black water, far out in the bay, soft yellow lights flickered on, moving slowly, like something waking up. At first, I thought they were bioluminescent algae or reflections from distant ships. That's what I told myself as the lights drifted closer to shore, glowing softly beneath the waves. They weren't steady. They pulsed, slow and deliberate, like breathing. The next morning, I asked Nora, the woman who ran the only cafe in town, if she'd ever noticed lights in the bay at night. Her hand froze around the coffee pot. She quietly flipped the sign to closed and sat across from me. "People who watch the lights too long stop sleeping," she said. "Then they start walking the docks at night." I asked where those people went. Nora shook her head. "They don't go anywhere. They just don't come back." That afternoon, I noticed something strange. Several boats tied to the docks had deep scratches along their hulls, long and curved, like they'd scraped against stone or bone far below the surface. That night, the lights came back brighter, closer, and for the first time, I felt something watching me from beneath the water. I tried to ignore the bay after that, burying myself in work. During the day, Blackwater Bay looked harmless. Gray water, gulls crying overhead, fishermen repairing nets in silence. But every person I spoke to carried the same tension, like they were all listening for something only they could hear. One afternoon, I was repairing wiring on an old trawler when I met Evan, a deckhand barely in his 20s. He watched me work without saying much, eyes constantly drifting toward the water. When I finally asked what he was looking for, he swallowed hard. "My brother used to night fish," he said. "Said the lights followed his boat. Said they moved to stay underneath him." I asked what happened to his brother. "They found his boat drifting," Evan replied. "Engine running, nets deployed, cabin empty." That evening, as fog rolled in thick enough to swallow the shoreline, I heard something new. Soft knocking sounds echoing up from beneath the docks. Slow, hollow, as if something below was testing the wood, learning where I stood. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The foghorn moaned somewhere far out in the bay, long and lonely. I stepped outside, drawn by a low humming sound that vibrated through the dock boards beneath my feet. The lights were closer than ever, dozens of them now, hovering just beneath the surface, arranged in a wide, deliberate arc. As I watched, the water above them began to ripple outward, even though there was no wind. Then the humming stopped. Something broke the surface, not fully, just enough for me to see a shape beneath the water, vast and uneven, like a reef rising where no reef should exist. The lights shifted, aligning themselves along its length. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, and nearly collided with Nora standing behind me. She grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You're not supposed to watch," she hissed. "It learns faces." I asked her what it was. She shook her head slowly. "It's been here longer than the town. The bay feeds it, and sometimes it feeds back." Behind us, the water rippled again, closer to shore. The next morning, Blackwater Bay felt strained, like the town itself hadn't slept. Fog clung to everything, thick and wet, muting sound and swallowing distance. I went to the docks early and found Evan sitting alone at the edge, boots dangling inches above the water. His eyes were red, unfocused. He told me he dreamed of his brother standing beneath the bay, illuminated by those yellow lights, mouth opening and closing as if trying to speak through water. When Evan woke up, his sheets were soaked, smelling faintly of salt. As we talked, one of the lights appeared directly below us. bright enough to cast a pale glow onto the underside of the dock. The wood creaked. Evan leaned forward, mesmerized, whispering his brother's name. I grabbed his jacket and pulled him back, just as something brushed the bottom of the dock, hard enough to make the entire structure shudder. From below came a sound like stone grinding against stone. That afternoon, the harbor master announced all-night curfews were in effect. No boats, no docks, no exceptions. That night, Evan was gone. Evan's boots were found lined up neatly at the end of the dock, toes pointed toward the bay. No footprints, no drag marks, just the quiet certainty that he'd gone willingly. The town didn't call the police. They didn't organize a search. They closed ranks instead, like this was a debt they'd always known would come due. That night, I couldn't stay inside. The humming returned, stronger now, vibrating through my chest like a second heartbeat. I stood at my window and watched the lights gather near shore, more than I'd ever seen, forming slow, rotating patterns beneath the water. As the tide pulled back, something surfaced further out, tall shapes, barely breaking the waves, like fingers testing air. The lights clung to them, outlining impossible curves and vast length. Then I heard voices, familiar ones, Evan's, his brothers, others I'd seen around town. They called softly, not begging, not threatening, inviting. My feet moved before my mind caught up. I stepped outside, drawn toward the dock, heart pounding with a certainty I didn't understand. Behind me, Nora shouted my name, and for the first time, the lights responded. Nora dragged me back inside her cafe and bolted the door, her hands shaking as badly as mine. The humming outside intensified, vibrating through the floorboards and rattling the windows. She told me the truth then, what the town never said out loud. Blackwater Bay wasn't just a harbor, it was a boundary. The thing beneath the water had always been there, older than the coastline, older than the names people gave it. The lights weren't bait. They were signals. When the bay grew too crowded, when grief and loneliness built up in the town, it responded. It doesn't take people, Nora whispered. It takes what they're already ready to give. Outside, I watched silhouettes move along the docks. Men and women walking calmly into the fog, faces peaceful, eyes fixed on the glowing water. No one tried to stop them. Then the lights shifted again, forming a wide, deliberate path straight toward the cafe. The glass fogged over from the outside, and something heavy pressed against the dock, testing the structure. Nora looked at me with hollow eyes. It knows you see it now. The power went out just after midnight. No lights, no hum, only the sound of water lapping gently against wood. The sudden quiet was worse than the noise. I stepped outside despite Nora's protests. The fog had thinned, revealing the bay glowing faintly on its own, like embers beneath black glass. The lights no longer moved. They waited. I realized then they weren't watching the town. They were watching me. I had listened. I had learned. I had almost followed. That made me useful. The water near the dock began to rise, bulging upward as if something massive was pushing from below. I saw outlines, ridges, long curves, too many angles to understand at once. The lights traced its form lovingly, like hands memorizing a face. A voice formed in my head, not spoken, not heard. It promised rest, understanding, belonging. I stepped back. Then another step. I turned away from the bay and walked inland, heart tearing itself apart with every step. Behind me, the lights dimmed. Disappointed. Blackwater Bay still stands. People still vanish. And every night, the water waits for someone who won't turn away. I left Blackwater Bay before sunrise, driving inland on a narrow road that climbed quickly away from the coast. In my rearview mirror, the fog swallowed the town piece by piece until the bay disappeared entirely. I told myself that meant it was over. That distance mattered. 2 weeks later, I woke up in a motel outside Prince Rupert with salt crusted along my windowsill. The air smelled like low tide. When I turned on the shower, cold seawater poured out for several seconds before clearing. I didn't tell anyone. I knew how that would sound. That night, lying awake, I felt the familiar vibration in my chest. Not loud, not urgent, patient. When I closed my eyes, I saw the lights again, fewer now, but brighter, arranged in the same slow, rotating pattern. I understood something then that terrified me more than the thing beneath the bay. It didn't need Blackwater Bay. Blackwater Bay was just where I'd noticed it. The boundary wasn't a place, it was a tension. I still work coastal jobs. I tell myself it's coincidence, but I always end up near water. Rivers, inlets, harbors. I never stay long. I never go out at night. And I never, ever watch reflections for too long. Sometimes, when I'm alone on a dock during daylight, I feel it. An awareness rising slowly beneath the surface, like something rolling over in its sleep. The water darkens. The world goes quiet. And for a moment, I feel seen in a way no human has ever managed. I think the people of Blackwater Bay understood something most of us don't want to accept. Some horrors don't hunt. They wait. They let us come to them, drawn by loneliness, curiosity, or the simple need to belong to something larger than ourselves. The lights are still there. They've always been there. You just don't notice them unless you're listening. So if you ever find yourself standing by dark water at night, and you feel a calm certainty urging you closer, step back, break eye contact, and leave. Because once the lights recognize you, they never truly let you go. My name is Jocelyn Hart, and this happened when I was 26. I moved to Kettle Valley, British Columbia, for a summer job at a small logging outfitter seeking solitude and a break from the chaos of Vancouver. The town was quiet in a way that felt almost wrong, nestled among dense pine forests and rocky ridges, with only a single road cutting through it. The cabin I rented was isolated, perched on the edge of a ridge overlooking a small, misty creek. Its wooden walls creaked with every gust of wind, and the porch sagged in places as if weighed down by time itself. The locals warned me to avoid wandering at night, but they didn't explain why. Their eyes would dart away whenever I asked. The first night, I woke to a faint whispering. Not loud enough to understand, but deliberate. Soft voices circling outside, brushing against the walls. I convinced myself it was the wind, or maybe a group of kids playing in the forest. But the whispering didn't stop. By the second night, I realized the whispering was coming from inside the cabin, though no one else was there. It moved slowly, circling the main room, sometimes pausing near the kitchen or the stairs. The voices weren't human. They hummed and whispered fragmented words I couldn't make sense of, like a language I almost recognized. I tried recording it on my phone. The playback was silent. Whatever was making the sound couldn't be captured. I asked the cabin owner, an older man named Graham, if anyone else had experienced it. His eyes narrowed, and he muttered something about doors you shouldn't open and rooms that remember too well. That night, I woke to the whispering coming from my bedroom. Louder, clearer, almost teasing. I pulled the blankets over my head, trying to ignore it. When I finally looked out the window, I saw faint, moving shapes in the forest, circling the cabin, not quite human, drifting between the trees. I realized the cabin wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. I spent the next day on edge, trying to convince myself that the shapes were just shadows from the forest, twisted by moonlight and fog. I barely spoke to anyone in town, avoiding even Graham, who seemed to know more than he admitted. Each time I glanced at the cabin, I felt eyes watching from the tree line. That night, I tried locking every door and window. The whispering didn't pause. It moved from wall to wall, sometimes behind me, sometimes beneath the floorboards. One particular moment froze me, a whisper directly into my ear. Soft, intimate, but in a tone that wasn't mine or anyone I knew. "Why did you come here?" it asked. I spun around. No one. Only the shadows stretched across the cabin walls. I realized then that the whispering was reactive, responding to my fear, my movements, my very thoughts. Outside, the forest seemed to pulse, dark shapes drifting closer, circling the cabin with deliberate patience. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the floor, every groan of the cabin felt deliberate. I began leaving lights on, candles burning, hoping to keep the whispering at bay. But it didn't matter. The voices learned the room, knew its corners, its walls, its ceiling. One night, I awoke to a shadow leaning over my bed. Its form was indistinct, fluid, but I could feel its intent, not malevolent in a simple way, but impossibly patient, studying me. The whispering was no longer words, only a low hum vibrating through the air, into my bones. I tried speaking aloud, demanding it leave. It responded, not with words, with laughter. Cold, brittle, echoing from every wall at once. I scrambled to the window, only to see the forest surrounding the cabin pulsate with movement. Hundreds of shapes, all drifting just at the edge of vision, almost invisible, following the rhythm of the whispering. For the first time, I understood. The cabin itself was alive. By the fifth night, I had stopped leaving the cabin at all. The forest outside pulsed with movement, almost as if it had a heartbeat, and the whispering had grown insistent, circling around me in a rhythm I couldn't ignore. I spent hours tracing it, pacing, trying to map its movement in my mind. But it shifted too quickly, adapting to my attempts. I found scratches along the wooden floorboards, long, thin lines I hadn't noticed before. They weren't random. They formed a pattern, almost like runes, leading from the front door to the hearth and then circling back around. Desperation took hold. I shouted at the voices, pleading, bargaining. They laughed. Then, something tapped on the ceiling directly above my bed. Slow, deliberate, like knuckles rapping a rhythm. The whispering paused for a heartbeat. A voice, unmistakably close, said, "You shouldn't be alone." I realized then that I had been alone the entire time, except for the cabin and whatever else lived inside it. I tried leaving the next day, packing everything into my car. But as I approached the door, the whispering became a wall, wrapping around me, pressing against my ears with hundreds of voices layered on top of each other. The door wouldn't budge. Not physically. Nothing was stopping it. But the pressure of the sound made it feel impossible to step outside. Graham appeared in the doorway, eyes wide, holding an old iron key. He whispered, "The cabin doesn't let go. Not easily." He explained that the cabin had been here for over a century, built over an old settlement whose residents had disappeared without a trace. The whispering was their echo, but not all of them remained. Some had fused with the building, becoming something that watched, waited, and sometimes took newcomers who lingered too long. As night fell, I realized the lights outside had shifted again. no longer flickering randomly. They traced the outline of the cabin itself, like fingers circling its walls. I had nowhere to run. The forest, the whispering, the cabin, they all knew my name. By the seventh night, I had stopped speaking aloud altogether. The whispering had become personal, responding to my thoughts, my movements, even my pauses. It no longer circled gently. It pressed in, filling the room like water rising to a dangerous level. I could feel it in my chest, in my stomach, in the back of my neck, a presence that didn't just observe, it learned. The shapes outside the cabin grew bolder. Shadows moved closer to the windows, lingering in the corners, almost leaning into the cabin as if testing the walls for weakness. I felt compelled to look, compelled to watch, even though every instinct screamed that it was wrong. When I finally dared a glance through the living room window, the figures weren't just outside. They were perfectly still, forming a semicircle around the cabin, waiting. The whispering slowed, deliberate now, almost like a pulse synchronized with my own heartbeat. For the first time, I understood what Graham meant. The cabin didn't just trap bodies, it trapped minds. I tried to barricade the doors and windows, piling chairs and boxes, anything to keep the shapes outside at bay. The whispering responded, faster now, a chaotic chorus that rattled the walls and ceiling. I could hear words I didn't know, syllables too old for a human mouth, phrases that scraped at my skull. In desperation, I ran to the loft, where I had been storing supplies. There, the whispering changed tone, calm, patient. A single voice rose above the rest, melodic, almost comforting. "Jocelyn," it said, unmistakably calling my name. "Stay, watch, listen." The floorboards creaked. Shadows flickered across the loft walls, forming shapes I couldn't quite name. My hands trembled, and I realized I was no longer thinking for myself. Every decision, every fear, every hesitation felt guided by something else, something living inside the cabin. And then I saw it. Not a figure, not a shadow. A movement beneath the floor, like the building itself was breathing, slowly rising toward me, waiting for me to choose whether to step closer or be consumed. By the ninth night, I understood the truth. The cabin didn't just whisper. It collected attention, feeding off the fear it provoked. I tried to leave. I really did. I packed my bag and stepped onto the porch. But the forest had shifted. The trees blocked the path. The mist formed walls around me. Every step felt heavier, like the air itself was resisting. The whispering rose again, layered, overwhelming, voices calling from every direction, from inside and outside at once. I stumbled back to the door, realizing too late that it was no longer just a structure. It was a where. The cabin's very walls pressed toward me, shrinking the space, guiding me to a corner. I sank to the floor, heart hammering, sweat running cold down my back. One voice lingered, calm, coaxing, almost tender. "You've come this far. Why leave now?" I understood. The cabin didn't allow departures. It didn't negotiate. It only decided who stayed. I never left. Not truly. The next morning, I woke on the loft floor, sunlight cutting weakly through the dusty windows. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. The whispering had slowed, retreating into the walls, the floor, the corners, but it never stopped. I could feel it always, a low hum beneath my skin. Graham never returned. No one else came to the cabin. Sometimes I hear laughter outside, soft and distant, and I know it's them. The shadows, the shapes, the voices of all who stayed before me. They drift through the trees, waiting, learning, reminding me that this cabin does not forget. I have stopped speaking to anyone, stopped leaving, stopped trying to fight it. I am part of it now. I walk its rooms, listening, watching, occasionally whispering back just enough to remain. If you ever find a cabin at the edge of the forest in Kettle Valley, with lights glowing faintly inside, and hear soft whispers calling your name, stay away. Because once it knows you, it never lets you go. My name is Ethan Clark, and this happened when I was 29. I was an avid hiker, always chasing remote trails and hidden lakes. So when I heard about Silver Pine Forest in British Columbia, I couldn't resist. The locals warned me to stick to marked paths and never hike alone, but that only fueled my curiosity. The forest was dense, ancient, with towering pines that blocked most of the sunlight. The air was damp and smelled of moss and decaying leaves. Birds sang occasionally, but mostly there was a heavy, almost unnatural silence. I arrived at the trailhead early, backpack loaded with supplies, camera ready. The first hours were peaceful, almost serene, until I noticed the trail markers were inconsistent, blurry, worn down, as if someone had deliberately tampered with them. By late afternoon, I realized something was wrong. The forest seemed to shift around me. Trees I had passed before now lined paths that shouldn't exist, and the sounds of my own footsteps seemed delayed, echoing from unseen corners. And then I saw the first set of footprints. Bare, wet, leading off the trail, vanishing into shadows I couldn't reach. I followed the footprints cautiously, curiosity outweighing fear. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. Even the birds had stopped singing. The trail narrowed, twisted, almost curling back on itself in impossible ways. I checked my GPS. It flickered, then froze. Compass refused to point north. After a few minutes, I realized I wasn't alone. Soft crunches behind me, just at the edge of hearing, kept pace with my steps. Yet whenever I turned, the forest appeared empty. My heart started racing, but pride and stubbornness pushed me onward. Eventually, I reached a small clearing, damp moss covering the ground like a thick carpet. In the center was a tree far older than any I'd seen, with gnarled roots twisting outward like fingers. Beneath it lay objects, personal belongings, a torn scarf, a cracked water bottle, a boot that looked familiar in shape, size, and wear. I recognized it immediately. They belonged to another hiker missing for weeks, someone the town had given up searching for. The whispering started then, faint, almost imperceptible. Coming from all around the clearing, I froze, my backpack heavy on my shoulders, as the whispering grew louder, circling the clearing. I couldn't make out words, only the tone, pleading, coaxing, almost hungry. The footprints I'd been following shifted subtly in the moss, as if the forest itself was moving them. Panic set in. I turned to leave the clearing, but the trail behind me had vanished. The path I had walked along was gone, replaced by endless rows of identical trees stretching in every direction. The forest had swallowed my route. I ran blindly, pushing through thick underbrush, branches slapping my face, roots snagging my boots. Every sound I made was echoed back at me, distorted. Sometimes it sounded like another person running alongside me, keeping pace, always just out of sight. Eventually, I tripped over something buried in the moss. It was a backpack identical to mine, worn and frayed at the edges. And inside, a journal. Entries from hikers who had vanished before me. Their last notes scribbled in panic. I flipped open the journal, scanning the frantic handwriting. Each page described the same cycle. Hikers following footprints, the forest shifting around them, whispers growing louder until they disappeared completely. The final page was almost illegible, smeared as if someone had cried or bled over it. The words ended with a single warning: do not trust the trail. It chooses who stays. A cold wind passed through the clearing, carrying whispers that now clearly called my name. I dropped the journal and spun around. Shadows moved between the trees, slow and deliberate, like they were observing me. I tried retracing my steps, but every path I took led me deeper into the same endless rows of identical trees. Sunlight that had been overhead vanished. The forest now glowed faintly with an unnatural twilight, shadows stretching impossibly long, following me no matter which direction I ran. Then I saw a figure in the distance, motionless, waiting. It was pale, thin, and impossibly tall, its head tilted at a wrong angle. My heart froze as it raised an arm, beckoning silently. I understood. The forest didn't just trap people, it lured them. I ran, heart hammering, ignoring the branches slapping my face and the roots clawing at my boots. The figure didn't follow in a conventional way. It moved through the forest, appearing further ahead each time I thought I had gained distance. The whispers intensified, layering over each other, now a chorus of frustrated, impatient voices that seemed to guide me. Eventually, I stumbled into another clearing, smaller this time. Moss covered the ground like a thick carpet, and scattered rocks formed crude patterns. I recognized some from the journal, marks left by previous hikers in desperate attempts to signal others. Their carvings in the rocks warned of the same thing. The forest chooses. Something shifted behind me. A shadow moved too fast for me to track, passing between trees like a ripple in the air. The whispers became urgent, almost commanding, drawing me toward a narrow trail I hadn't noticed before. I had no choice but to follow it, each step weighted with dread, knowing it might be leading me straight into the forest's hunger. The trail narrowed further, branches clawing at my arms and legs as if trying to hold me back. The whispers shifted from pleading to mocking, repeating my name over and over. My vision blurred from exhaustion and fear. Each time I glanced over my shoulder, I saw fleeting glimpses of pale figures just beyond the trees, watching me, waiting. Then I noticed footprints along the trail, smaller, almost childlike, but impossibly precise, matching my own pace, always staying just ahead. Someone, or something, was mimicking me, guiding me deeper into the forest. I realized that every hiker who had vanished had made the same mistake, following signs they thought would lead them out. Instead, the forest used their hope against them, twisting paths, erasing familiar landmarks, feeding off their panic. By the time I reached a fork in the trail, the whispers had stopped, leaving a silence so heavy it pressed against my eardrums. Both paths were identical, shrouded in mist, leading straight into the heart of Silver Pine Forest. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, unsure if I was running from the forest or toward it. I chose the left fork, my boots sinking slightly in the moss. The forest seemed to shift around me, trees bending subtly, branches forming walls I had to push through. The whispers returned, soft, coaxing, almost gentle. But there was an edge to them now, impatient and cold. I realized the forest didn't just lure people. It tested them, measured their fear, their determination. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a hollow, circular clearing. Sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy. At the center, an old stone well jutted from the ground, crumbling, covered in vines. I felt drawn to it, my footsteps moving without my permission. From the shadows, shapes began to emerge, human-like but twisted, their limbs elongated, faces pale and unreadable. They circled the well, silent except for a low hum that vibrated through the ground. The whispers crescendoed around me, guiding me closer. I understood then. The well wasn't just a feature of the forest. It was its heart, a point where it collected those who strayed too far. I approached the well cautiously, heart hammering in my chest. Each step was guided by a force I couldn't resist. The whispering rose again, a chorus of voices speaking in overlapping tones, some familiar, some alien. Their words teased my mind, promising safety if I only stepped closer. When I reached the edge of the well, I peered inside. The darkness seemed endless, impossibly deep, and within it, faint shapes moved, faces, arms, and legs of hikers who had vanished over the years, drifting silently in the black water below. My stomach churned. I wanted to turn away, to run back the way I came, but my body refused. The shapes around the well leaned in, almost touching me. The whispers became my thoughts, replaying my fears, my doubts, my regrets. A hand, impossibly pale and thin, reached toward me from the shadows. The forest's intent was clear. It had chosen me. And if I stepped closer, there would be no return. I froze at the edge of the well, staring into the endless darkness. The whispers intensified, overlapping into a deafening chorus that filled my mind. Shapes shifted at the periphery of my vision, limbs bending unnaturally, faces pale and unblinking. Every instinct screamed at me to step back, but my legs moved forward, drawn by the impossible gravity of the well. Suddenly, a hand shot out, not from the shadows, but from the darkness inside the well. It grabbed my ankle with unnatural strength, cold searing through my skin. I stumbled, barely keeping my balance, and the figures around me leaned closer, pressing silently. I understood then. The forest didn't simply trap hikers. It collected them, feeding on their fear, drawing their attention until it was impossible to escape. I screamed, twisting and kicking, finally breaking free for a moment. The shadows recoiled slightly, letting me pull back. But I could feel their gaze burning into me. The forest was patient. It would wait. I ran, sprinting blindly through the misty forest, branches slapping my face, roots trying to catch my feet. The whispering followed, softer now, taunting rather than guiding. Every turn I took, the path seemed to fold back on itself, twisting impossibly. I was no longer sure which way was out, only that I had to keep moving. After what felt like hours, I emerged onto a narrow road, sunlight filtering through the thick trees. My body shook, covered in scratches, sweat, and mud. Behind me, the forest seemed still, silent, almost content. But I could feel its awareness lingering, watching me retreat. I never returned to Silver Pine Forest. Hikers still vanish there every year, some never even leaving the trailhead. I tell people it's just old legends, lost hikers, misdirection. But deep down, I know the truth. The forest isn't lost. It waits, and it always remembers those who wander too far. My name is Mara Thompson, and this happened when I was 24. I had taken a short winter trip to Raven Creek, British Columbia, to photograph the frozen landscapes and untouched forests. The town was small, isolated, blanketed in snow, with only a handful of residents who all seemed wary of strangers. They warned me to stay indoors after dark, but curiosity and my stubborn nature pushed me to explore. The first evening, I wandered along the frozen creek that ran through the town. The ice shimmered under the weak winter sun, and the surrounding pines were heavy with frost. It was breathtaking and eerily silent. Not a single animal, no wind, no distant sound of cars. Just a profound, unnatural stillness that made my skin crawl. As night fell, I set up my camera on a tripod, aiming to capture long exposure shots of the moonlit snow. That's when I first noticed it. A pair of pale, reflective eyes staring at me from across the creek, unmoving, observing. I froze, heart hammering. But when I blinked, they were gone. I convinced myself it was a trick of the ice, a reflection of my camera's tripod or the moonlight glinting off something metallic. Yet, every time I glanced up, the eyes reappeared. Always at the edge of the forest, always watching, never moving closer. By the second night, the town streets were deserted, and the cold bit deeper than normal. I walked cautiously along the creek, camera ready, photographing the ice and trees, hoping to catch the source of the eyes on film. The reflection in the frozen water was distorted, long, and unnatural. The eyes seemed larger in the reflection, unblinking and filled with malice. I tried asking the locals about it. One man, bundled in heavy furs, shook his head quickly. "The creek watches," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Some things stay in the ice. Some things see. And if it chooses, it follows." I laughed nervously. But that night, I dreamed of faces frozen beneath the ice, their eyes wide, staring up at me from below. By the third night, I had begun to notice patterns. The eyes weren't random. They appeared only when I was alone, always at the edge of the creek or just beyond the trees. They followed me silently as I walked, never blinking, never moving closer, but always present. I tried to photograph them again, but the images revealed nothing. Only the frozen creek and snow-laden pines. It was as if the eyes existed outside of normal reality, glimpsed only by my own vision. That night, the whispering began. Not voices, but a low hum emanating from beneath the ice. At first, I thought it was the wind, the ice shifting. But the tone changed when I approached the creek. It was deliberate, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat calling to me. Compelled, I knelt at the edge of the frozen water, brushing snow from a smooth patch of ice. I could see shadows moving beneath it, faces distorted, frozen in time, pale eyes staring straight at me. Something about them felt familiar. I began hearing it then. The soft crunch of snow behind me, deliberate footsteps that didn't match mine, stopping whenever I stopped. I spun around, camera raised, but the streets were empty. Only the faint glow of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The eyes reappeared, this time in the reflection of the ice itself, larger and closer, unnaturally aligned. They followed me, moving with purpose, not randomly, as if calculating my every action. I felt the weight of their stare pressing down on me, freezing my thoughts, my limbs, my very will. That night, I tried to sleep, but every shadow in my cabin seemed to flicker and twist. Outside, the frozen creek glimmered unnaturally, the ice distorting shapes beneath its surface. By midnight, I could hear whispers, low and distorted, seeping through the floorboards. The town had always been quiet, but now it felt alive, aware of me, warning me, taunting me. Something beneath the ice was waiting, and it knew my name. By the fifth night, I could no longer ignore the eyes. They followed me everywhere, even inside the cabin. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, forming shapes I couldn't quite recognize, thin, pale silhouettes that mirrored the frozen faces beneath the creek. I began sleeping with the lights on, but the glow only made the eyes appear sharper, more focused, their gaze like icy knives through my skull. I ventured outside again, camera in hand, hoping to capture proof or at least distract myself from the oppressive feeling of being watched. The creek looked normal in the weak moonlight, but the eyes appeared instantly, now hovering just beneath the surface, moving toward me with purpose. A whisper came then, so soft I barely heard it. "Come closer." I froze. Something primal in me wanted to obey. Something else screamed to run. My pulse thundered in my ears as the shadows of the forest seemed to lean closer, anticipating my next move. I stepped back, nearly falling on the icy bank, heart racing. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, forming words that twisted around my mind. "Join us. See. Stay." My camera slipped from my hands, clattering against the ice, but I didn't care. All I could see were the eyes, following, beckoning, alive with a hunger that I couldn't comprehend. The shadows from the trees began moving toward me, gliding silently over the snow. They didn't run, they didn't walk. They simply drifted, surrounding me, merging with the reflections in the creek. Panic surged, and I realized the ice was no longer just frozen water. It was a window, a mirror into a hidden world beneath, where the lost and the frozen waited for new eyes to join them. I turned to run back to the cabin, but the forest had shifted again. The path I had come from was gone, replaced with endless snow-covered pines. The whispers now carried a cruel certainty. I was not leaving Raven Creek tonight. By the seventh night, I had stopped trying to understand. Logic no longer applied in Raven Creek. The forest and the frozen creek were alive, aware, and deliberate. Every step I took, the shadows and eyes mirrored me, predicting my movements, anticipating my fear. It wasn't hunting me, it was teaching me, testing me, showing me the impossible reach of its influence. The whispering became clearer. It spoke in 1,000 overlapping tones, all calling my name, all promising the same thing. Stay. Desperation clawed at me. I couldn't leave, but I also couldn't submit. My mind spun as the creek's ice seemed to ripple, shadows forming frozen faces of hikers who had disappeared before me, their eyes staring straight into mine. I realized that the forest, the creek, and the ice were one entity, and I was a visitor in its domain. I backed away slowly, trying to find a way to escape, but the shadows shifted in unison, cutting off every path. The ice beneath my feet groaned, cracking in long, deep lines that shimmered with a ghostly light. I realized then that every face beneath the ice was watching me personally, their frozen expressions twisting in silent screams, urging me toward the center of the creek. The shadows from the forest merged with the reflections, forming ghostly tendrils that reached for my boots, brushing against me with cold that burned my skin. I stumbled into the middle of the frozen creek, and the ice felt impossibly thin, yet solid, as if it knew it would hold me. The whispers swelled into a roar, echoing through my mind, urging me to kneel, to look deeper, to join the frozen watchers below. I could see shapes moving beneath the ice, shadows stretching, hands reaching up, faces pale and twisted, staring into my soul. The forest had drawn me here. It wasn't satisfied with observation. It wanted participation. The frozen eyes were not just watching, they were waiting for me to become one of them. By the 9th night, exhaustion and fear had merged into something heavier, a paralyzing dread that made my limbs feel like lead. The shadows shifted constantly, pale faces beneath the ice staring with endless patience, waiting for me to make a choice. The whispering had become my own thoughts, repeating my regrets, my desires, my fears in voices that weren't mine. I wanted to step back, to flee to the safety of the cabin. But the ice seemed to pulse beneath me, urging me forward. Tendrils of shadow stretched from the forest, merging with the frozen faces beneath the creek, forming a bridge of darkness and frost. My heart pounded as I realized there was no escaping. The creek had claimed my attention, my presence, my will. I felt my knees buckle under the weight of it all. The ice groaned beneath me, echoing like the collective sighs of the vanished. I understood then. Once the eyes chose you, there was no leaving Raven Creek. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to summon the courage to step back. But when I opened them, the ice had shifted. I was surrounded, not by shadows, but by frozen figures, their pale eyes glinting from beneath the surface, unmoving yet fully aware. The whispers became a single, unified command. Stay. Panic surged, and I ran blindly across the ice, the surface trembling beneath my weight. The shadows followed, gliding just out of reach, merging with the figures beneath. My legs finally gave way near the edge of the creek, and I collapsed onto the snow-covered bank, gasping, shaking, utterly exhausted. I never returned to Raven Creek. The town seems quiet and normal now, but I know better. Every winter, the frozen eyes awaken, watching for the next visitor. Patient, deliberate, eternal. If you ever see a frozen creek in Raven Creek, with pale reflections beneath the ice and shadows moving at the edge of the forest, turn away. Because once it chooses you, it never forgets. My name is Lucas Harper, and this happened when I was 26. I had recently moved to Blackwood, British Columbia, a small town shrouded in fog and mystery. Locals warned me about Blackwood Bridge, an old iron bridge that spanned a narrow river at the edge of town, saying it was better left alone after dark. Naturally, curiosity and a love for abandoned places drew me there. The bridge was rusted, creaking with every gust of wind, surrounded by dense pine forests that seemed to swallow the faint glow of my flashlight. The river below gurgled quietly, yet the air was unnervingly still. I stepped onto the bridge, recording my exploration on camera, enjoying the adrenaline that came with every squeak of iron beneath my boots. Then I noticed something odd. Shadows on the far side of the bridge shifted unnaturally, though there was no wind. Shapes, humanoid, elongated, stretched along the fog, watching me with intent. My pulse quickened, but a part of me was compelled to keep moving forward, toward whatever was waiting in the mist. I cautiously moved along the bridge, flashlight trembling in my hands. Each step echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the metal beams and thick fog, making it feel like something, or someone, was matching my pace. The air grew colder, unnaturally so, biting through my jacket as if the mist itself had teeth. Suddenly, I heard it, a soft, scraping sound, metal against metal, coming from beneath the bridge. I froze, straining my eyes into the darkness. Shadows moved beneath the railings, twisting and elongating in ways that shouldn't be possible. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat, swallowed by the thick, unnatural silence. A faint whisper reached my ears, chillingly close. "Why are you here?" I spun around. The far end of the bridge was empty. Nothing moved in the fog, except the shadows stretching toward me, drawn by my presence, testing my fear. I realized then that this bridge wasn't just old, it was alive in some way, a sentinel of something dark that waited for intruders. I took a hesitant step forward, trying to steady my breathing. The shadows shifted again, darker, almost pooling like liquid along the rusted beams. Each step I took seemed to echo in time with a second set of footsteps behind me. Deliberate, heavy, but invisible. My flashlight flickered, briefly plunging me into near darkness. Then I saw them. Pale, elongated figures, standing along the bridge's edges, unmoving yet watching me with impossible patience. Their faces were blank, their eyes hollow voids reflecting the weak beam of my light. I wanted to turn and run, but the bridge seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions, mocking me. A faint scraping sound returned, louder this time, circling beneath my feet as if something moved through the iron beams themselves. My pulse raced, and every instinct screamed to leave. Yet the whispers returned, soft, cold, almost inviting. Come closer. Don't resist. I realized then the bridge wasn't just haunted. It fed on fear, waiting for someone to break first. I froze, staring at the figures, their blank faces eerily still, yet somehow aware. The bridge groaned under my weight, or maybe theirs, echoing like a warning through the fog. I tried to speak, to ask what they wanted, but no sound emerged from my throat. Suddenly, a low metallic scraping ran across the bridge, circling me. I looked down. Shadows moved unnaturally on the metal floor, shifting like liquid, forming hands that reached toward my boots before retracting at the last moment. Every hair on my body stood on end. I backed away slowly, trying to find the start of the bridge, but the fog twisted the structure. The far end seemed farther, curling impossibly into darkness. Whispers turned into words, echoing inside my head. You belong. Panic surged. I ran blindly toward the nearest edge, my boots slipping on frost. The figures mirrored my movements, always just out of reach, their presence pressing on my mind, forcing my fear to consume itself. I realized Blackwood Bridge wasn't just haunted. It controlled the bridge and anyone foolish enough to walk it at night. I stumbled forward, heart hammering, as the fog thickened around the bridge. Each step became heavier, as if the bridge itself resisted me. The elongated figures on either side didn't move closer, yet I could feel their presence pressing in, constricting the air around me. The whispers circled my mind now, overlapping, commanding, mocking. Stay. You belong here. I tried to call out, but my voice was gone, swallowed by the oppressive silence. The scraping sound returned, louder, coming from all directions at once. I glanced down at the metal floor of the bridge. Shadows had formed hands, reaching for me again, curling and stretching unnaturally. Every step I took forward seemed to pull me further into their world, and the far edge of the bridge remained impossibly distant, like the bridge had elongated itself. A sudden gust of wind carried faint laughter, low and hollow, echoing across the river below. I knew then that the bridge wasn't just haunted, it thrived on terror, feeding off those who dared walk it. Panic surged as the fog thickened even more, swallowing everything beyond a few feet. The shadows moved subtly now, almost independent of the figures, stretching and curling across the metal floor, following me like a tide. The whispers intensified, forming distinct words in my mind. Run, or join us, forever. I bolted, adrenaline pushing me across the slippery metal, but the bridge seemed to twist beneath my feet. What had been straight now curved impossibly, stretching into a void I couldn't comprehend. The elongated figures mirrored my movements perfectly, always staying just out of reach, but their presence made the air feel impossibly heavy. I glanced down again. The shadowy hands beneath the floor had multiplied, writhing like living things. They were trying to pull me in, to claim me as they had claimed countless others before me. The scraping sound became deafening, echoing inside my chest, vibrating through my bones. I realized with a sickening clarity, the bridge didn't just haunt people. It trapped them, bending reality itself to ensure they never left. By the seventh night, I was on the brink of madness. The bridge had become a labyrinth of fog, shadows, and twisting metal. Each step forward felt like it was stretching into eternity. The elongated figures no longer just watched. They moved in rhythm with me, circling subtly, always just beyond the flashlight's beam. Their blank, pale faces reflected in the puddles of ice that had formed on the rusted iron floor, mocking my terror. The scraping beneath my feet now felt alive, like hundreds of fingers clawing at the metal, urging me closer to the center of the bridge. The whispers became a single, oppressive voice in my head. Do not resist. You will stay. Forever. I realized the bridge didn't want me to cross. It wanted to claim me. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but the fog shifted behind me, closing off the way I had come. My only choice was to keep moving forward, toward the unknown, toward the dark heart of Blackwood Bridge. The far edge of the bridge seemed impossibly distant, stretching into darkness. I ran, slipping and sliding over icy patches, feeling the shadows brush my back with every step. The fog seemed to thicken and pulse, almost alive, wrapping around me, feeding on my fear. Suddenly, a figure emerged directly in my path, tall, elongated, faceless. It didn't move with legs, but hovered slightly above the metal, sliding silently toward me. Panic surged, and I leapt to the side, narrowly avoiding the icy tendrils that shot from it, curling along the bridge like living snakes. The whispers reached a crescendo, overlapping into a deafening roar in my mind. I could feel the bridge itself bending, twisting, changing shape to trap me. My flashlight flickered violently, casting the figures in grotesque, shifting forms. I realized with stark clarity that the bridge was not just haunted, it was sentient, testing my fear, my resolve, and my will to survive. There was no turning back, only survival or becoming part of it. By the ninth night, exhaustion and sheer terror had gripped me completely. The bridge stretched endlessly in every direction, fog thick and suffocating, the shadows pressing closer with every heartbeat. The scraping beneath my feet now felt like claws, sharp and urgent, trying to pull me into the metal floor itself. I realized that the bridge didn't just trap you, it absorbed you, bending reality to make escape impossible. I ran, each step slipping on ice, my flashlight flickering as if protesting against the oppressive darkness. The elongated figures mirrored my panic perfectly, gliding silently just beyond reach, their pale, faceless heads tilting unnaturally to observe my every movement. The whispers twisted my own thoughts into commands. Step closer, join us, never leave. My chest burned, lungs screaming for air. But I knew that if I faltered, if I hesitated, the bridge would claim me. It had claimed countless others before me. Each lost soul now part of its sentient darkness, waiting for the next victim. I could see the far end of the bridge now, faintly lit by the weak glow of the moon through the fog. Summoning every ounce of strength, I sprinted, slipping and sliding, with the shadows close behind. The whispers merged into a single horrifying chant, echoing in my mind. Stay. Forever. As I neared the edge, the bridge itself groaned and twisted, threatening to swallow me into the abyss. I jumped the final few feet onto solid ground, collapsing onto the frozen snow of the forest beyond. Behind me, the fog swallowed the bridge again, hiding it as if it had never existed. The elongated figures lingered briefly at the edge, pale and silent, before vanishing into the mist. I never returned to Blackwood Bridge. Locals say it's just an old, abandoned structure, but I know better. It is alive, patient, and waiting. And if you ever wander onto it at night, it will see you, follow you, and test your fear. My name is Evelyn Carter, and this happened when I was 29. I had rented a secluded cabin in Whispering Pines, British Columbia, hoping to escape the chaos of the city and reconnect with nature. The town was small, surrounded by dense, snow-covered forests, and the locals were friendly but wary, warning me to avoid the woods after dark. Naturally, I didn't listen. The cabin sat at the edge of the forest, smoke curling faintly from the chimney. Inside, it was rustic, cozy, and eerily quiet. On the first night, I lit a fire and unpacked my things, feeling a strange unease despite the warmth. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, a low susurration that seemed almost like voices carried by the branches. Later, I stepped outside to take in the crisp night air. The forest beyond the cabin was shrouded in darkness, and I noticed movement, shadows shifting just beyond the trees, always at the periphery of my vision. They didn't run, they didn't flee. They were watching, waiting, and patient. That night, I couldn't sleep. The whispers outside grew louder, carrying tones I didn't recognize, words almost intelligible but distorted, like a language I should have known. Every rustle of the trees made me jump. Every creak of the cabin floor made my pulse quicken. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, determined to find the source. The snow was pristine, untouched, yet I noticed faint footprints leading into the trees. They didn't belong to any animal I knew. Too large, too deliberate, stopping and starting as if whoever, or whatever, had been studying me. The shadows shifted again, forming shapes that seemed humanoid, but stretched and contorted unnaturally. I froze. A voice, soft and hollow, whispered directly into my mind. "You shouldn't be here." I stumbled backward into the cabin, heart racing. The door slammed shut behind me, though I had closed it moments before. It felt as though the forest itself had followed me, pressing its awareness into the walls of the cabin, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. By the third night, the forest felt alive, its presence pressing against the cabin walls. The whispers had grown louder, almost coherent, repeating fragments of words. "Come, join, stay." I kept the fire burning all night, yet the shadows beyond the windows stretched and twisted in ways that made no sense. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was the wind, the trees, my imagination. But a part of me knew better. The footprints in the snow returned each night, circling the cabin, stopping near my window, then disappearing into the forest. They didn't belong to any human or animal I recognized. One night, I stepped outside to investigate, flashlight trembling in my hands. The trees seemed to lean closer, branches brushing against each other to form distorted shapes, humanoid yet impossible. My breath caught as I glimpsed pale eyes in the distance, staring directly at me, unmoving but aware. I stumbled backward, tripping on snow, and realized with dread that the forest wasn't just surrounding me, it was waiting, and it had noticed me. The next night, I barricaded myself inside the cabin, trying to ignore the whispers that now seemed to seep through the walls. Every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of the windows made me flinch. I could feel the forest pressing closer, as if the pines themselves were alive, bending subtly to block any path to safety. I tried recording audio on my phone, hoping to capture evidence. But when I played it back, the whispers were louder, distorted, overlapping, and impossible to understand. Shadows flickered across the walls, cast not by the fire, but by shapes moving just outside the windows. They were tall, elongated, and pale, stretching impossibly into the mist. A sudden pounding at the cabin door made me scream, and I bolted toward the back window. The snow outside was undisturbed, yet the shadows moved along the tree line, circling me, patient, deliberate. I realized that the forest wasn't just haunting me, it was learning my fears, feeding off my panic and shaping its approach accordingly. By the fifth night, exhaustion and terror had become inseparable. Every sound, branches cracking, wind howling, snow crunching, felt deliberate, as if the forest itself was mocking my attempts to survive. The whispers had grown coherent in fragments, repeating my name over and over. Evelyn. Stay. Don't leave. My heart pounded in my chest, threatening to break free. I tried to step outside, reasoning that the cold, crisp air might clear my mind. The snow was pristine, untouched. Yet I could see shadows moving unnaturally just beyond the tree line. Pale, elongated figures emerged, forming clusters among the pines, their blank faces tilted toward me, aware and patient. I froze, rooted to the spot, realizing the forest was watching my every movement. A soft rustle behind me made me whirl around. Nothing. The forest remained silent, yet the shadows moved closer. Every instinct screamed to run, but the snow seemed to shift under my feet, slowing me, bending reality, keeping me trapped in the woods with them. I retreated to the cabin, heart racing, hands shaking so badly I could barely light the fire. The whispers had followed me inside, faint but distinct, circling the room as if the walls themselves had become conduits. I could almost feel the elongated figures pressing at the windows, their blank faces peering through the frost and mist. Determined to survive, I grabbed my flashlight and camera, planning to document whatever haunted these woods. As I stepped outside, the shadows swirled at the edge of the forest, elongating and contorting unnaturally, moving toward me without breaking the snow. The trees seemed alive, leaning inward as if to block my retreat. The whispers grew louder, overlapping in a deafening chorus. Come, see, join. I stumbled into the snow, trying to backtrack, but the forest had shifted. The path I had taken before had vanished, replaced with endless, towering pines. I realized with growing horror that the forest didn't just observe, it controlled everything, bending reality to ensnare me in its silent, malevolent grip. By the seventh night, fear had sharpened into a cold, constant edge. The forest no longer felt distant. It pressed against the cabin, against my mind. A living presence that watched, calculated, and waited. Every shadow flickered unnaturally. Every whisper coiled around my thoughts, repeating fragments of my own memories in distorted tones. I stepped outside again, trembling, hoping to trace the source of the whispers. The snow was pristine, yet I could see pale, elongated figures standing just at the edge of the tree line. They didn't move, yet I felt them shifting with my heartbeat, leaning in, probing my fear. I could hear the snow crunch under invisible feet behind me, though no one was there. A gust of icy wind carried words directly into my mind. You cannot escape. We are patient. I realized that the forest itself had a will, and I was trapped inside it. Each step forward felt heavier, as if the pines themselves were pressing down, guiding me towards something I could not yet see. The shadows began moving deliberately, slithering between the trees like living smoke. The whispers grew coherent, forming sentences that echoed in my skull. Come closer, join us, your fear feeds us. Panic surged through me as the elongated figures emerged fully into the faint moonlight. Their pale, faceless forms seemed to stretch impossibly tall, bending around the pines, circling me, pressing closer without sound. I stumbled backward toward the cabin, flashlight barely illuminating the snow. But the forest had shifted again. The path I had taken before was gone, replaced by a corridor of looming dark pines. Every tree seemed alive, its branches curling toward me like fingers. The shadows moved in tandem with the trees, herding me toward a clearing I had never seen. My mind raced, heart pounding, realizing I had been lured deliberately. The forest wasn't just haunted. It hunted, studied, and manipulated, shaping the snow, shadows, and whispers to break my resolve. There was no escape until I confronted whatever waited in the heart of Whispering Pines. By the 9th night, exhaustion, fear, and isolation had melded into a suffocating weight. The forest pressed close, shadows weaving in and out of the pines, their pale, elongated forms circling me like predators. The whispers had become deafening, repeating every thought I tried to suppress. "You cannot leave. We are patient. Forever." I stumbled through the snow, trying to find a path back to safety. But the landscape had shifted. The trees formed impossible angles, a corridor with no end, guiding me deeper into the forest. Shapes moved at the edge of my vision, pale and silent, mirroring my panic perfectly. My heart pounded as I realized the forest was not only alive, but intelligent, studying me, feeding on my fear, bending reality around me. The distant moonlight barely reached me, casting long, fractured shadows that danced on the snow. Every step forward felt like wading through invisible hands, pulling me toward a center I did not want to reach, toward the forest's waiting heart. I finally reached a clearing, a space that felt both open and suffocating. At its center stood a cluster of enormous pines, gnarled and blackened, their shadows stretching impossibly across the snow. The elongated figures surrounded me silently, faceless yet fully aware, pressing in from all sides. The whispers became a single command. "Stay, join us, forever." Panic seized me, and I bolted blindly toward what I hoped was the edge of the forest. Snow crunched beneath my boots, the cold biting my skin. But the shadows followed relentlessly, gliding over snow and ice as if weightless. I tripped and fell, scrambling to rise as the fog thickened, blurring the line between forest and nightmare. When I finally broke through the tree line, the clearing vanished behind me. The forest was quiet, still, as though it had never been alive, but I knew the truth. Whispering Pines waited, patient, calculating, eternal. And if you ever wander too close, it will watch, and it will never forget.